In terms of Lebanon's wine heritage, some of you might be interested to know that there's been a wine culture in the country for about 7,000 years, which makes it one of the oldest wine-producing countries in the world. If we assume that wine as we know it today was originally made somewhere in the Caucasus near Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, then we can assume that that was the kind of first part of a triangle that took in what is now southern Palestine to the west and Mesopotamia, which is modern Iraq, to the east. And Lebanon falls very neatly within that triangle. I think, though, for when Lebanon's wine industry began proper, I think we have to go to about 3000 BC and the emergence of the Phoenicians. They were a trading people who lived on the Lebanese coast. They built city-states, Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre, and from these city-states, their big trireme boats went out into the Mediterranean, where they sold their purple dye and, of course, the wine that was very highly prized by the Romans, by the Greeks, by the North Africans, particularly by the Egyptians, who had a habit of burying their dead with Lebanese wine from Byblos, funnily enough, which is, no, I haven't got a picture of Byblos, which they could take with them into the afterlife. So if we can say that Lebanon was not the first country in which wine was made, I think the Lebanese, and this will appeal to Lebanese of today, can lay the claim to being the world's first wine traders and wine merchants, because what they did was they took the wines that they were growing all along the coast, put them in the amphorae, put them in their boats, and sent them off as far as France, and some people even say as far as Cornwall. The next major indication of a wine culture would be the construction of the Temple of Bacchus in 250 AD. This is in Baalbek, which is a city in the central Bekaa, where a lot of Lebanese wine is made today. Bacchus, as you know, is a Roman god of wine, and it is the biggest such temple of its kind in the world. And I think its presence in the Bekaa, in one of the most eastern fringes of the Roman Empire at the time, is proof that there really was a cult surrounding wine and merriment and dancing and the whole culture that goes along with that. And if you go to Baalbek today, the temple is still very much intact, and it really is one of the most fascinating bits of wine archaeology that you can go and see. Nothing much happened in terms of Lebanese wine culture development until 1857. So there was a bit of a hiatus of 1,600 years when the Jesuit priests in what is now Chateau Ksara, Lebanon's biggest producers, decided that they want to make a wine that was different to the slightly sweet church wine that was being made, or that had been made in the country for about 400 years before that. So the Jesuits went to Algeria, where they brought foreign vines. It was probably Cinsault, perhaps Carignan, but we're not sure. And they planted these vines in the grounds of what is now Chateau Ksara. And I think we can say that in terms of the modern Lebanese wine industry, that was the ground zero. A French engineer called Eugène François Brun arrived in the Bekaa, working on the Damascus Railway, and he decided that he wanted to take advantage of the obvious vinicultural potential that the Bekaa had, and he established what is today known as Domaine de Tourelle, which again is exhibiting on the Wines of Lebanon stand. And I think we can say that if Chateau Ksara was the first winery to make a modern style of wine, Domaine de Tourelle is, and I might get in trouble for saying this, was probably Lebanon's first commercial producer, because the Brun family then took their wines to London and exhibited it and even won awards. Now, these are the workers at Chateau Xara. These are people picking the vines at Chateau Xara, and that is the picture of Domaine de Tourelle, the winery of which is still there today. The next date of interest in the evolution of Lebanese wine will be 1918, end of the First World War, and the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. And Lebanon was handed over to France as part of its mandate to run all the dominions that the Ottoman Empire had been in control of. I think about 50,000 French soldiers and civil servants descended on the country, and so as you can imagine, there was a sudden demand for wine. And the French wasted no time in convincing a lot of the grape growers to turn what they were doing into wine and supply the French army. That kind of gave the wine industry some momentum until Lebanon got its independence from France, or it got its independence in 1943. And the relative sophistication and cosmopolitanism that Lebanon acquired between 1943 and 1975 again gave Lebanese wine that push, probably making it the most international hub in the region. 1975 came, a bit of a dark year for the Lebanese wine industry. Country descended into civil war, and the wine industry, as we knew it then, came to a halt. One producer decided the best form of defense was attack, and he decided to locate in London and try and find export markets for his wine. Chateau Musard is probably still today the most recognizable wine made in this country, and Serge Hochar did a great deal to put Lebanese wine on the map. But with the end of the Civil War in 1991, the industry has really taken great strides to try and catch up with the trends in the global market and to demonstrate to the world that while Chateau Musard is a very famous and profound and complex wine, it's not really representative of Lebanese wines per se, and there are a lot more wines out there that are more familiar to the modern palate. And I think the wines that you'll be tasting with Tim will go some way to demonstrate that. End of the war in 1991, there were only 4 producers. Now, 20 years on, we now have 35. Lebanon produces 7 million bottles of wine a year, still a very microscopic amount by global standards, but I think Lebanon being a boutique country, you have Lebanon with a boutique industry. I think that the way the sector is developing, small producers producing between 20 and 100, 150,000 bottles a year is one of the ways in which you're going to see the Lebanese wine industry evolve in the next 5 to 10 years. Right, I'll take any questions at the end, but I think that's brought us very nicely up to where we are. And I'm going to hand you over to Tim. And
Hello.
You can taste about the wines I've been talking about. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. Does that work? Yes, you can hear me. Fantastic.